Hello, everybody. We're back and we're here with Eileen Sanchez. And Eileen's topic is memoir versus fiction. Did that really happen? Eileen is now retired after a 40-year career in education. She started as a teacher and ended as a district administrator. She is a reader and a writer, and she calls herself a perennial. A person with no age mindset. I like that, Eileen. I actually hadn't heard that before. And she considers family and friends to be the most important part of her life. Followed by traveling and bird watching from her gazebo. Eileen's book is Freedom Lessons, and it's her first published novel. She's also the administrator of Prose and Pandemic and blogs as Graham's Book Club, right?
Right.
Recommending books to inform young people of the small stories that make up our history. Oh, I love that, Eileen. That's very cool. I love that. Before retirement, she presented numerous workshops to educators in the district, state, and national level. And she continues to do that kind of thing virtually at this point. And we will put up Eileen's link for her book as she's speaking. But at this point, Eileen, I'm going to, yes, I will turn off I will mute myself and take myself off the screen, and I'm going to turn it over to you. So welcome. We're delighted you're here.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted. And Leslie, if she's still on, my goodness, what a hard act to follow. Very inspiring. I'd like to welcome everyone that is watching. I'm just honored to be a member of Story Circle Network. And this will repeat what Susan said earlier, where women become the authors of their lives. Women's stories matter. And I became a debut author at the age of 72. So I'm also here to tell you that it's never too late to write that story and get it published. When my book, Freedom Lessons, was published, our youngest daughter gave me a plaque that says, "I want every girl to know her voice can change the world." Well, we can change the whole world, or maybe our little world, but I wrote the book especially for my daughters. That was what I was inspired to write. And I believe that our stories need to be told, and it takes courage to write them, but that's the first step. So why did I write Freedom Lessons? 10 years ago, I was at a professional educational conference in New Orleans, Louisiana. After a long day of presentations, we went out to Pat O'Brien's, a great bar in the French Quarter. If you ever visit New Orleans, be sure to go there and have a hurricane and request your favorite song to be played by the dueling pianos. And you can see them on the stage. There's a big mirror that's in back of the piano, so it looks like 4 pianos, but it's just an amazing place to be. So in between the drinks and the entertainment, I surprised the people that I was with when I told them that I had taught in a small rural town in Louisiana that closed overnight on November 4th. They closed a Black school overnight on November 4th. And I had rarely shared that experience. When I had that experience after that year, I moved back to New Jersey, and people in New Jersey had no idea of what it was like anyway. So a friend challenged me to write about my life during that year. And that's what I did so that my daughters and my grandchildren would learn about it. At that time, we had one granddaughter. She was 2 years old. So when I was teaching, when I started to write, it was a memoir. And I realized that I only knew my story. What happened to my students? There were, at the end of that year, I never saw those second graders again. I went back to New Jersey when my husband was discharged from the Army. And as I wrote, a memoir became historical fiction when I created characters to help me tell a broader story of that year, but a little bit more about that later. So this is Frank. Frank helped me to tell the story of the high school students from that year that I taught. About a little more than 10 years ago, I was able to visit the town and the school that I had taught in. The visit filled in some of the history of the people and the community. And one of the opportunities allowed me to meet the current principal. The school that I had taught in did reopen as a middle school, and the principal had been away in college the year of mandated integration. But she told me some of her own family's experiences. I wanted the class list of my students. That's why I went to the school. I was hoping to get in touch with them to find out what happened to them. Um, and she said all those records were missing. They were not in the school. She sent me to another school to find them. Everyone was very helpful, but all those records were missing. So, but what she did tell me was that the Black community was very upset at the end of that year because the Black high school students weren't going to be allowed to graduate. Her brother was one of the high school seniors in 1969, and his story helped me to personalize and build a deeper story for Frank. So, as a young teacher from the North in 1969, I wasn't easily accepted by the local teachers, either Black or white. My friends are Army wives like me. Evelyn is an African American teacher I created to be a friend that Colleen, the character that tells my story, didn't have but wished for. Fiction helped me to create a friendship that I did have in later life with the woman in the photo that's on the left side of my screen. And her name is Evelyn. So that's why I named the character Evelyn. My research verified the facts that I did remember. Black segregated schools were staffed with devoted, highly educated teachers. Yet the Black teachers, when the schools closed, became assistant teachers in the white teachers' classrooms. And in the following year, some of those teachers actually lost their positions. Well, not all personal stories require research, but this one did. I started my research in two New Jersey libraries. My hometown library connected me to a librarian in Louisiana. And through her, I found newspaper stories of the time, both local newspapers in Louisiana and even the New York Times, which told the stories that reflected what the Northeast knew about that, what's happening that year. But most importantly, I found a dissertation titled, Even the Books Were Separate. And that was a narrated dissertation, and it was written by Dr. Gary Clark, who was a high school student in Louisiana during that year. So you're here to think about what, if you're ready to share your writing or whatever stage you're at in your writing. So I found these 5 signs about sharing writing, and I started writing by sign 5. I felt that someone would benefit from my story, and I have had that hope come true. As I said, I started writing it really just to inform my family, my daughters and my granddaughter, what I had done that year, what had happened to me, what we experienced. And so here I joined a writing group in Writer Circle here in New Jersey. I would recommend that if it's possible. We're not able to meet in person during the pandemic, but we're still meeting. I'm still meeting weekly now virtually. So a writing group is very helpful if you can find one for yourself. So this was 8 years ago or so, and I was a multi-genre writing group, and they had copies of my 8-page attempt at memoir. And my essay talked about the November day that I moved into the trailer classroom on the lawn of the white elementary school with my second grade class of 30 Black students. The Black school had been suddenly closed the previous day. And why? because the Civil Rights Law of 1964, which had mandated the integration of public schools, it was due. They had to close, school boards had to comply or lose federal funds by December of 1969. So that was what I wrote about, a memoir, just my memory. My essay was ready for critique from the group. And after I finished reading, I looked up to see shocked faces and hear surprised reactions from this group of white writers in a suburban New Jersey town. I was hoping to learn how to write a memoir. I was not prepared for the instructor, herself a published author, to say, "I think you have a novel." Well, that novel took 5 years of research, critique writing, workshops, edits, rewrites, revisions. But during that time, I developed a confidence in my voice and my story. I became my own agent, and I found a publisher for my self-imposed deadline of 2019, because that was the 50th anniversary of the events that I have fictionalized in my story. But let's take a look at the story you have to tell. If you're ready to share a story that's based on a personal experience, you might have the intention, like I did, to write it as a memoir. But as I wrote, that wasn't, it really wasn't helping me to tell the whole story as I was learning the whole story. So what I would like you to do is to jot 3 things that you could write on, or perhaps you are writing on, just 3 ideas. You can keep it private or you could write it in the chat, but I'd like you to think about a secret, a big secret, a small one, a fear, big or small, a life-changing event, something that had a huge impact on your life, or maybe it was just a small thing that happened, but it really made you stop and think. It really made you turn and make a decision. An embarrassing moment. Maybe you were job hopping. It could be about families, food. Maybe it's about your parents. When did you find out that they weren't perfect? So just take a moment, write 3 things, 3 ideas, because I'd like you to think about them in a while. So, good reasons to write it as a novel. When I was preparing this workshop, I found this Writer's Digest article by Adair Lara. The link is in the slide, but it will also be at the end of the presentation under resources. So the article is about 10 ways to tell if your story should be a memoir or a novel. Now, I didn't go through these steps before I wrote, but in a way I kind of experienced them as I wrote and shifted what I was writing, and they really rang true for me as I looked at some of these. Freedom Lessons is told from 3 points of view. Colleen, the character that told my story, for her story, I was able to rely on my memory, but I had to fictionalize and recreate events because my memory wasn't exact. In other words, I made some things up. And since I didn't write much about my family, number 2 wasn't a big problem. But after my family read my book, we all realized that they never understood the experience that I had that year, in part because I didn't talk about it, but it was also because there was nobody that really could understand it. They had not gone through that experience with me. So I took my story and just kept writing. And this is bringing me back to Leslie's inspirational talk, like you just have to move forward. So that's what I did. So what are the good reasons to write it as a memoir? You can take a time to look at those 5 points. And memoir sneaks into freedom lessons because some people strongly identify with my story. and the truth of what happened that year. Some people don't identify with it, but they are shocked to read what happened. I already told you about Gary Clark's dissertation. Even the books were separate. He introduced me and my book to a college professor in Louisiana, Dr. Michael Hicks. And Dr. Hicks and I have become friends. And he used my book in his college classes as they commemorated the 50th anniversary of what some in Louisiana call the crossover, which was the integration of the public schools in Louisiana. But that's a story for another day. So just take a look at those other points. Um, the unlimited choices of fiction. Mine was pretty clearly, if I was going to write it as fiction, it would be historical fiction. Um, it wasn't a kind of a story that a quirky, appealing voice, which I don't even think I have, but I wasn't being creative in that way to be entertaining. But I was writing a story to explore questions about what happened. So it could have fit a memoir, but I'll talk about why it didn't for me as we move through this slides. So you have a story or an idea in mind. I asked you to get three ideas down. And at this point in our talk, what do you think the best way to tell your story is? Let's just think about what your gut reaction is, memoir or fiction. Did one of the reasons that I just went through stand out for you? Just you could write it down for yourself if you want to write it in the chat, but just if you're exploring about which way you should go, take the time now to what's your gut reaction, and we'll see if it stays true or you change your mind. So, and again, in preparation for this talk, um, I work with a community of people. I'm always somebody that likes the community of authors that I have been so fortunate to find through my publisher, through my Facebook groups, through Story Circle Network. And I thought of some books and authors that I either knew for sure or I was pretty sure were strong examples of personal experiences told through fiction, but could have been memoir. So I contacted these authors and two more that I'll introduce you in a while. And I asked their permission to share their books as examples. I also asked them to share why they chose fiction over memoir. So I'd like to tell you about each book so you just have an understanding of the background, a short description. So Rita's book is the first one, the 14th of September. On September 14th, Private First Class Judy Talton celebrates her 19th birthday by secretly joining the campus anti-Vietnam War movement. In doing so, she jeopardizes both the Army scholarship that will secure her future and her relationship with her military family. Judy's story speaks to the poignant class of young adulthood, early feminism, and war, offering an ageless inquiry into the domestic politics of protest when the world stops making sense. Janae's book is Behind the Lens. 8 years ago, seasoned photojournalist Annie Hawkins Green barely survived a Taliban ambush that left her military escort dead and a young Afghan girl dying in her arms. Since then, she has managed to suppress her memories of that brutal day until she returns to Afghanistan to teach photography workshop at the secondary school for girls run by her expat best friend, Dara Faludi. Gail's book, After Kilimanjaro, you meet Dr. Sarah Whittaker. Sarah has always been an obedient overachiever, but she is burned out. Training to be a surgeon is stressful. So when her fiance David offers a solution, take a break year at a hospital in Africa. That's different. And climb Mountain Kilimanjaro together. She jumps on board. When he backs out, she embarks on the adventure alone. Julia's book, Julia Daly, No Names to Be Given, is told from three women's perspective. This mesmerizing story is based on actual experiences of women in the 1960s who found themselves pregnant but unmarried, pressured by family and society to make horrific decisions. How that inconceivable act changed women forever is the story of No Names to Be Given, a heartbreaking but uplifting novel of family and redemption. So, your turn. Remember those three things I asked you to write down. Choose one to focus on. Pick the tough one. And think about it as we look at the reasons these writers used fiction to write their story and why you might want to use fiction to write yours. So I asked these four authors the question, based on these 6 points, why did you choose to write your personal story as fiction? I emailed the 6 points to them, and I asked them if any resonated for them, and if so, to share their thoughts. So let's just read them. I think that you can see the screen, but I just want to make sure you get the points. So to have creative freedom is a good reason. To build necessary story pieces for the reader. To protect friends, family, and myself. To provide various points of view. To retell fictionalized events from my experience in the second or third person. To make it more compelling than the plain truth. So let's take a look at the first one, and you keep your story in mind. To have creative freedom to develop characters, scenes, and story. I have the next 6 slides have speech balloons that might be hard to read depending on the device you're on. I'm not planning to read what's in the speech balloons, but to summarize them or point out the strong points from them. So if you're reading from a phone or a device that you can't see these, you'll be able to review them in the future when, you can take a look on a different device. But here's the first point, which strongly matched for Gail, Julia, Rita, and Janae. Gail's and Janae's main characters shared their professions. Gail is a surgeon. Gail's protagonist is a doctor and a surgeon. Janae is a photojournalist. Her protagonist is a photojournalist. I'm an educator, like Colleen is in my book. Rita and Julia shared their life experiences, but hidden in fiction. I always knew the impact that year teaching in the Deep South had on my personal history. But when I realized how significant the event was in the history of our country, and I realized I was a witness, I felt a responsibility to share the story. But I had to tell more than my story. That required research and personal interviews. And I needed creative fiction. So to build necessary story pieces for the reader to understand the protagonist. As I said, I needed creative fiction. How to explain a young 22-year-old woman from New Jersey wound up in the middle of the end of segregated schools in the Deep South. How to explain that, how to show what that was like. One point of view wasn't enough. I'm an educator. So they say, write what you know. To tell the whole story, I had to write what I didn't experience, but only witnessed. But that took a lot of research to develop that. But let's look at what Rita Rita felt that she had to help her characters get to where they needed to go. Janae wanted to insert food and culture and its impact on the people and on her protagonist. Gail used logic to fill in the gaps of the story, like how to explain what this young woman was doing after she climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. And Julia was able to build a broader story than she would have written as a memoir 40 years ago when she first found her birth mother. There was just so much more information. She could take it from her life experiences as well and create her novel. So, to protect friends, family, and myself, I found Colleen's story the hardest to write because I had to protect myself. As I was writing, I realized that I had to revisit that time. I had to take a deep look into what I did and what I didn't do, what to reveal, what to skip. Like in my writing workshop, we had an assignment to write a sex scene for our work in progress. A sex scene? No, I can't do that. I want my grandchildren to read this story and I want them to know it's me. I wasn't ready to share that kind of a scene in my book. I also struggled revealing the actual town I taught in that year in Louisiana because I knew I wasn't going to create a positive image. I struggled with writing about the town I grew up in, which is considered by some as a sundown town. If you don't know what a sundown town is, that's for another day as well. So Rita did write a sex scene that she has to deny what really happened to her. She didn't have it. Her story, the sex scene that was in her for her protagonist was not how she lost her virginity, and she has to defend that. So sometimes when you write something that you have created, but you've created this character that's so believable and people think that it's you, well, you're leading them down. You might need to defend some of what you've written. But Rita also put characteristics of real people into her story. She picked a woman that she knew that would always say, "Oh, wow," and the guy that they called the wizard. So I felt that these are good examples of adding personality and quirks into your characters. In my own book, I included my father we used to send recorded tapes, little tape cassettes back and forth in the mail. That's how you did it in those days. That was technology at its newest, finest level. And that was part of the story. I also got my grandmother into my book by having her quotes from Eleanor Roosevelt that she would always say to me. So you always can, your life will give you quirks and interesting points to throw into other characters or to give an understanding of the time frame of your book. So look out, friends, you might wind up in my book. Another reason to write fiction over memoir is to provide various points of view. And two of my main points of view characters are African American. Their story and their experiences are composites of facts in newspaper articles, historical references, dissertations, and interviews. Their fictionalized experiences were essential to build the necessary story pieces to understand Colleen's experiences. It was a shared story. Both Rita and Janae decided that a single point of view served their stories best. So it was more like a memoir would tell the story from one point of view. Julia's story has multiple points of view to share the experiences of the child and her two mothers. Fiction helps you to make it more compelling than the plain truth. The plain truth was, I didn't know that there were still segregated Black schools in this country when I moved to Louisiana. I was one of 3 white teachers in a K-12 school. Creating the fictional characters helped me to tell the whole story and share the facts that most or many people don't know. Rita reminds us that reality hurts. Gail says that numbers don't have the same emotional impact that the details might have, that do have when you're reading about one baby's death. Janae's personal experience has helped her to recreate authentic situations for her character with real emotion. These authors used facts wrapped up in emotion to draw in the reader. To retell fictionalized events from my experience in the third person is the last reason to choose fiction over memoir. Creating characters helped me to tell Colleen's story. There were many things I didn't understand that year. I'm still learning about those years. Gail drew from her medical experiences, training, and working as a doctor. Newborns in Tennessee might have a better chance than newborns in Africa, but one Tennessee's baby story is now immortal. Julia dug deep into heartaches and joy to share personal, life-changing, emotional events as she educates the reader. Which of the 6 reasons to write your story as fiction speaks to you? Just take a quick look at those and jot it down for yourself and see if you're still feeling that you want to write it as fiction, or maybe you're shifting to memoir, or maybe whichever, you're just still in the decision point. So these authors chose to write memoir. I want to tell you about Donna's book. Solo in Salento is a personal story. It's about simple truths of life. And she says, truths I had tucked away in order to fit in, to be the perfect child, daughter, sister, wife, employee, friend, and on and on. For years, I didn't give voice to myself. So it was important for me to write nonfiction, to speak my truth, to heed my own voice, to walk on a path I chose for myself. She says I was 67 when I took that solo trip. I was not young. I was not looking for adventure or romance. I was searching for self, and I thought it was important to share that journey with others. Eileen's book, Hippie Chick Coming of Age in the 60s. It's 1963, and we're brought along as Eileen becomes immersed in the unfolding of the 60s during the earliest days of sexual freedom, psychedelic drugs, the jazz scene, and rock and roll. This is a deeply personal story of how one young woman manages to survive and even thrive in the face of whirlwind experiences coming at her. Okay, back to you. Choose another one of the 3 topics if you're feeling that you want to shift, or you could stick with the same one. Now focus on this topic and think about the reasons to write it as memoir, as these 2 authors did. So the same thing, I sent the 6 points to write it as memoir to these 2 authors. Why did you choose to write your personal story as a memoir? To focus on the elements of real life, personal experience, intimacy, and emotional truth. For self-discovery, to really examine your own experiences. To create a narrative thread that ties your personal experiences together. To objectively identify moments of growth or trauma. It allows you to tell your own story, to give readers the raw experience of true story, and to make sense of the past. So when you write memoir, you want it to be as true as you can make it. With fiction, you have a much larger body of water to play with. Those are not my words, they're from Pat Conroy, A Low Country Heart, Reflections on a Writing Life. But to focus on elements of your real life, personal experience, intimacy, emotional truth. I think Eileen and Donna give their reasons best. And what stands out to me are emotional truths. Honor my sister. Truths tucked away in order to fit in. To write a memoir, you are going to experience self-discovery. You have to really re-examine your own experiences. And this is a point that I had to work through before I could write historical fiction. I had to examine the experience of a difficult year, adjusting to an unfamiliar culture with its unwritten rules in the Deep South. Everyone struggled through the mandated integration, the whole town. I never forgot about my 30 second graders that I was forced to keep back in second grade 2 weeks before the year ended. I always believed I let them down. Throughout my career, I advocated for students that were misjudged and underestimated. Writing this story helped me to find my voice, but I couldn't write it as memoir. Do you need to find your voice? What will it be, memoir or fiction? You have to, in writing memoir, it's recommended that you create a narrative thread that ties your personal experiences together. But even in fiction, I had to create a narrative thread to tie three seemingly unrelated characters together. I found those threads in family. Family offered each of my characters security, identity, and values. I found it in individual actions of courage by each character. Memoir writers have great courage in using their experiences for others to find their truths, in the words of another. Another reason is to objectively identify moments of growth or trauma. And these comments speak for themselves. Donna says, the antagonist was me, fighting my own demons. And Eileen noticed how tenacious this girl was. Such a cool girl, but she never gave up. So we got that message from Leslie this morning too. Endurance, never give up. Whether it's writing your memoir or writing your story, however it comes out, don't give up. And it's going to be hard work. This writing memoir allows you to tell your own story, to give readers the raw experience of a true story. And as I look at these quotes, these are the comments, the words that jump out for me. True story, writing in present tense, first person point of view, and healing process. So if this is speaking to you, maybe memoir is right for you. It wasn't right for me. Not having a personal journey from that year limited my ability to write it as memoir. Interviews and the narrative dissertations I used, which were other persons' experiences, helped me to understand the events, and it helped me to write fiction. Frankly, memoir got too painful. Writing in third person about my experience gave me an outsider's view, and it allowed me to see the young woman I was, to understand and to forgive her. I don't think I could have done that with memoir. Memoir helps you to make sense of the past. Is this what you need to do? These words stand out in these quotes. Heed my own voice. The realization that I was loved. Going back and studying the past. So those were the 6 reasons that you might choose to write your story as memoir. Does one of them speak to you? Based on that topic that you chose, just please answer the question. Does one of these reasons speak to you? You could write it for yourself if you want to put it in the chat. Please do. I hope that we can have time for questions. I see that I'm running longer than I expected, but looks like we still have time. and maybe we can have time for questions or comments in the chat. But first, I want to note that there are 4 more slides with the resources that I used to prepare this presentation and links to the websites of these 6 authors. I'm so grateful that they allowed me to share their comments. I have read each of their books and I highly recommend each one. So please help me thank them. Their books are available anywhere you buy books, but I always ask readers to support local bookstores. So these are the links that will take you to the articles that I used. The one that was most helpful that I used was from the writer masterclass. I'm sorry. So this is expanded details of I condensed them into short passages, but advantages to writing your story as a novel. And sometimes it's felt it's better for first-time writers, but Donna was a first-time writer and she wanted to write as memoir. I believe Eileen was also, this is her debut book. But Donna was advised to write it as fiction because it would sell better, but she said no, it had to be a memoir. These are the advantages to writing your story as memoir. They expand it. You'll have a chance to take a look at these at another time. I don't want to spend too much time just going on those. Here's the websites links for Janae, Behind the Lens, Donna Keel Armour, Solo and Salento, Julia Daly, No Names to Be Given, Gail Woodson, After Kilimanjaro, Rita Dragonette, The 14th of September, Eileen English, Hippie Chick, and my own book, Freedom Lessons, a novel. So, fiction contains memoir, memoir contains fiction. Again, Pat Conroy says it best. When we write, I think we can't help but reveal something about ourselves. When I retired, I wanted to write for myself. I needed to find my voice, let it reveal what was hidden in my message. I'm comforted by the communities of writers I've found that understand what I mean. And now that I've written my novel based on my own experience as a young teacher, I've been able to use my voice at book talks, interviews, and workshops like this. Writing has given me a way to share my voice. I also want to take a moment to thank Story Circle Network, especially Liz Beatty for her patience and guidance in the PowerPoint sharing glitches, and to Len Leatherwood, who I've taken several classes with, and I highly recommend her classes, and to the reviewers for accepting and including my proposal in this virtual conference. So that's done. I think we have just a few minutes left, and if I'm going to end the slide, I think, end the show.
Eileen, I've got some questions. First of all, let me just say I really, really enjoyed that. That was very helpful. I love that you included these other books and these other authors and their thoughts. And not to mention that just makes you such a good literary citizen that you are including your writing community, which but all of that wisdom, collective wisdom, was extremely edifying. So thank you for that.
Okay.
Now I do have some questions that are in the chat, so let me read them to you and then you can address them, okay?
Okay.
One is from Brenda Clem Black, and she says, my book, Black and Kiddo, is considered a creative nonfiction, sort of a cross between memoir and fiction. Can you address that?
Oh, well, I guess I'm wondering who's saying it's a cross between, and that it's a cross between fiction. I think that they are. So that's the way you wrote it. In a way, it'll depend on what you want to do with it. And if I would look for some guidance from some other writers, which I guess that's why you're asking me. But I think that you have to see who your audience is. You have to really think about who do you want to read it, and how will that help the by maybe choosing one or the other. At what point, I don't know what point. Is this already published, or are you looking to publish it? So I think that uh, some marketing or uh, advice on who do you want to reach? We don't, I didn't write my book intending to, never thought that it would, be uh, on the New York Times list. I wrote it for certain people. So I think you have to think about who you're writing it for. Who do you want to read it? That's my best advice now.
Okay. All right. And here is Tina Games. And her question is, when we're writing for self-discovery, is it typically referred to as a teaching memoir? I've heard that term used by publishers.
To writing for self-discovery, teaching memoir. It could be. I'm not an expert in memoir. So I think, again, I would say, like, what it's going to be about, who's your audience, and are you teaching? I mean, in a way, my book becomes a teaching tool. That's how I would like it to be used. So it's what your intention is for your book. I would go with what you want, not what the publisher is telling you.
Okay. And back to Brenda Clem Black, she said her book is already published. And so I think maybe that the idea of creative nonfiction book where you are blending, you're using, it is technically nonfiction, but you're using creative elements like, plot, where you're doing an arc with your plot, you're developing your characters, you're using literary elements,
Right.
simple and
so that's to engage the
and
reader.
that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we can get stuck in what other people call our books. And we just need to write our stories and see where they land. When my book was, at first I thought that it would be better suited as a young adult, but the publisher said it won't sell as well in that genre. But it's really, I think that's who it speaks to, the college students and the high school students that I've been working, that I have worked with directly with, and some teachers. So it's again, you need to find your audience. Who do you want to read the book? Who are you speaking to? You're going to find other audiences too. There's many people of my generation that I am now finding want to know, but well, how did this happen? We don't know anything about this. So you're going to find it's your writing, both for both questions, the questioners. It's your story, and you just go out and tell it.
Okay. All right. And I was struck by the line in terms of writing fiction, facts wrapped up in emotion to draw in the reader. I thought that was a really powerful way to describe that sometimes that's what you're doing when you've chosen to write it in fiction, that you get some facts, but you do wrap it in an emotional truth so that it can reach the reader more powerfully.
And that's the story arc that I think it was Brenda, wrote her nonfiction as. That's, I mean, you want to engage the reader.
Exactly. Yeah. Sarah Byrne Rickman. Hi, Sarah. She just wrote, creative nonfiction simply allows you to use techniques of fiction, scene setting, dialogue, the story arc, etc., but always using fact. That's the difference. Which is very different than, one or the other. That's a blend, but you're always using facts. So that's a different from memoir, from fiction. That is very different from fiction. And in some ways, I almost wonder, well, no, because you created characters is what you did. You created fictional characters. That takes it out of creative nonfiction. The minute you do that, that you create that, at least that's my understanding.
Yeah, I think so.
They have to be factually based.
Even though the characters are composites of factual events and factual experiences. It's not one character's experience. So it's fictionalized.
I see. I see.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Well, let me just I see another message down here. Thank you, Eileen. Very helpful presentation. That was from Brenda. Then you also have Susan Schmoke. Hello, Susan. She says, thank you, Eileen. You provided so many reasons and a thoughtful process for clarifying intention and goals. This is a very helpful presentation. And thanks, Liz, for putting the links in the chat. Yes. And that also reminds me, we will be sending out PowerPoints for any of the presenters who want us to. Sometime early next week. It'll take us several days to coordinate all that, but you will receive those. So that should be helpful too. Lucy Arcan said, you've given me so much to think about and so much to rethink. Thank you. Christina Wells, thanks, Eileen. This is helpful. Jeannie Guy presented in question format has helped me determine I'll write my second book as a memoir for all the right reasons. Thank you, Eileen. So you've gotten a lot of very positive responses here. So with that, I think we can wrap up.